Every society tells itself that war is temporary and prices will come back down when it is over. They are almost always wrong. From Rome fighting desperate frontier campaigns while shaving silver out of its coins, to Britain printing money and selling its future to pay for world wars, to modern states flooding their economies with newly created currency to fund emergency operations, the pattern is the same. War and inflation are not separate crises. They are two sides of the same slow-motion collapse. This is not about headlines or talking points. It is about the deep mechanics of how governments pay for violence and how that payment quietly moves from the battlefield into your grocery bill, your rent, and your savings account. The story is always sold as patriotism, security, or national survival. The bill is always paid in purchasing power. In this video, you will see 15 hidden facts about war and inflation that most people never see until it is too late. You will see why every major conflict eventually turns into a monetary event, why your currency is always on the front line even if you are not, and why inflation almost never goes back to where it started once the shooting stops. Stay with this until the end. Fact 7 will change the way you think about temporary wars, and the final fact will show you the one mental shift that separates those who are destroyed by these cycles from those who survive them. Hidden. Fact 1. Governments almost never pay for war honestly on paper. There are 3 ways to pay for war: raise taxes, cut other spending, or borrow. In practice, political leaders almost always choose the 4th option. Quietly dilute the value of money. Raising taxes during war is unpopular and visible. Cutting other spending engages powerful interest groups. Borrowing works for a while, but lenders eventually demand higher interest or refuse to lend at all. At that point, the temptation is obvious. If the state controls the currency, it can simply create more units of it and call that financing. Rome reduced the silver content of its coins. Britain and others abandoned gold standards to print as needed. Modern states expand central bank balance sheets and sell bonds to themselves. The labels differ. The effect is the same. The war is paid for by everyone holding the currency through rising prices and falling purchasing power. Most citizens never vote for that. They simply live with it. Hidden fact 2. War demand and broken supply chains guarantee higher prices. War consumes things that cannot be replaced quickly: fuel, food, ammunition, metals, machines, manpower. At the same time, it disrupts the very networks that used to supply these things smoothly. Trade routes are blocked. Ports are bombed. Fields become battlefields. Workers become soldiers. The result is simple and brutal. Demand surges, supply shrinks, and prices rise. It does not require conspiracy or speculation. It is arithmetic. During the world wars, grain, coal, and steel became scarce and expensive. In every major conflict, people learn the same lessons again: ration cards, empty shelves, long lines, and quiet anger. Even after the fighting moves elsewhere, the infrastructure does not instantly repair itself. Supply chains take years to normalize. Prices rarely return to the old baseline. War builds a new floor under inflation and leaves it there. Hidden fact 3. Temporary emergency measures quietly become permanent tools in almost every war. Governments introduce extraordinary monetary measures and promise they are temporary. Price controls, rationing, wage freezes, capital controls, special war bonds, direct central bank purchases of government debt, all justified as necessary until victory is secured. The war ends. Many of these tools remain. They may be renamed or adjusted, but the precedent is set. The state has learned that it can manage markets, set prices, and meddle with currency in the name of survival. The public has already accepted it once. Accepting it again in the next crisis becomes easier. Over decades, this is how normal monetary policy changes. Powers that would have been unthinkable in peacetime become routine. War acts like a door that, once opened, never fully closes. Inflation is not just a side effect. It is a training ground for future interventions. Hidden fact 4. War propaganda always hides the inflation story during war. Citizens are shown images of brave soldiers, enemy atrocities, and heroic speeches. They are not shown spreadsheets detailing how their currency is being diluted to pay for it all. Leaders talk about sacrifice in terms of lives, hardship, and national unity. They rarely explain that every new batch of money created to fund weapons and logistics will quietly lower the purchasing power of existing money. That story would make it clear who is really paying, not just the enemy or the rich, but every saver, every worker on a fixed salary, every pensioner. Instead, propaganda encouraged people to buy war bonds, accept wage controls, and feel proud of doing their part. The monetary mechanics are buried in technical language. By the time citizens feel the full force of inflation, years later, when the war is over, the connection has faded from memory. The anger has nowhere to go. Hidden fact 5. Wars rarely end when the shooting stops. The bills keep arriving. The last shot of a war is not the last cost of that war. Veterans' pensions, medical care, equipment replacement, reconstruction, interest on the debt accumulated during the conflict, all of these bills come due long after peace treaties are signed. To pay them, governments keep borrowing and keep leaning on the same inflationary tools they used during the fighting. The difference is that public attention has moved on. People expect a peace dividend, lower spending, and calmer times. Instead, the state is locked into high baseline costs that do not easily shrink. The First World War was followed not by a clean financial reset but by years of debt, reparations, and currency crises. The Second World War left countries with obligations that shaped their budgets for generations. In every era, the shadow of war stretches far beyond the battlefield. Inflation in peacetime is often just the lingering echo of choices made under fire. Hidden fact 6. Inflation is a silent draft on your savings in wartime. Governments impose drafts on bodies, conscription for the army. Inflation is a quieter form of conscription on wealth. When a state prints money to pay for war, it does not ask permission from savers. It simply reduces the real value of what they hold. Cash loses purchasing power. Bonds denominated in the local currency pay back less in real terms than they cost to buy. Wages lag behind prices. The effect is the same as a tax, but without the open debate or clear bill. This inflation tax is politically attractive because it is slow and confusing. Few people can calculate exactly how much their currency has lost over a decade. Even fewer can trace that loss back to a specific war budget. By spreading the pain over time and across the whole population, governments avoid visible confrontation while still extracting enormous resources. Hidden fact 7. The worst inflation comes when war meets denial. Some leaders accept that war is expensive and adjust quickly, raise taxes, cut non-essential spending, limit ambitions. Others insist on fighting on every front, maintaining every program, and promising citizens that life will remain normal at home. That combination, maximal war goals plus a refusal to adjust at home, is the seedbed of hyperinflation. Weimar Germany after World War I tried to meet impossible reparations, support domestic spending, and avoid politically dangerous cuts. The printing press became the balancing item. In more recent conflicts and crises, countries facing sanctions, war, or internal conflict have sometimes chosen the same path. Keep promising, keep spending, and let the currency absorb the stress. Hyperinflation is not just about too much money. It is about a government that refuses to admit that the war, or the aftermath of the war, has already made its previous promises mathematically impossible. Hidden fact 8. Even small. Wars can trigger big monetary shifts. People imagine that only world wars or total mobilizations can reshape money. History disagrees. Limited regional conflicts, protracted insurgencies, and police actions have all driven major inflationary waves. What matters is not the formal label of the conflict, but its duration, cost, and the state's willingness to adjust. A long, grinding war that drags on for years can quietly drain the treasury just as effectively as a short, explosive one. Small wars are also easier to ignore, which makes it more tempting for politicians to hide their costs in the money supply. Citizens are told that these operations are contained, affordable, under control. Meanwhile, defense budgets creep upward, emergencies multiply, and the central bank becomes more active. By the time inflation reaches everyday life, almost no one connects it to the small war that helped create it. Hidden fact 9. Inflation reshapes who wins and who loses. From war. Official narratives say the nation sacrifices together. Inflation exposes the lie. War inflation does not hit everyone equally. Those with hard assets, land, commodities, durable goods, often see their wealth keep pace with or outrun prices. Those close to government contracts earn profits in newly created money. Debtors see the real weight of what they owe shrink over time. Meanwhile, savers in cash, workers on fixed wages, retirees on nominal pensions, and small businesses without pricing power watch their position erode. War decides battles. Inflation quietly decides class structure. After every major conflict, you can see a reshuffling. Some groups emerge stronger without ever hearing a shot fired. Others lose everything without ever leaving their hometown. The battlefield is only half the story. The balance sheet finishes the job. Hidden fact 10. Once trust in money breaks, defeat can arrive without invasion. Countries rarely fall solely because they run out of soldiers. They fall when they run out of trust. If citizens stop believing that the money they earn will hold value, they start hoarding goods, foreign currency, or anything else that feels safer. Markets seize up. Tax collection collapses as people hide income. The army may still exist on paper, but paying it becomes almost impossible. Allies lose faith in the currency and demand real assets instead. Enemies see weakness. In some cases, governments facing this kind of monetary breakdown surrender, split apart, or change regimes without an enemy ever marching into their capital. The war is lost not on the front line but in the bond market and the grocery store. The flag may still fly. The system underneath it has already died. Hidden fact 11. Post-war booms often rest on fragile monetary foundations after wars. Economies sometimes experience rapid growth. Factories retool for civilian goods. Pent-up demand is unleashed, and reconstruction creates jobs. It feels like a fresh start, but if that boom is built on unresolved war debts and continuing monetary expansion, it can hide long-term damage. Asset prices soar. Housing becomes more expensive. Stock markets climb. Underneath, productivity may not be keeping pace. The new prosperity is partly real, partly the effect of more money chasing the same or only slightly more goods. When the next shock arrives, another conflict, an oil crisis, a financial panic, the unresolved war inflation returns to the surface. What looked like stable progress reveals itself as a long, uneven adjustment to past decisions. Hidden fact 12. War justifies the kind of surveillance that makes future inflation easier to manage wartime economies. Governments build systems to track production, prices, wages, and transactions. They introduce ID systems, financial reporting rules, and controls over capital flows. Again, all justified by the need to win. Those tools do not vanish when the enemy does. They become part of the permanent machinery used to monitor and influence economic life. In a future monetary crisis, authorities can rely on that infrastructure to enforce capital controls, freeze accounts, or direct lending in ways that channel the pain of inflation toward specific groups. War and inflation are both about control of territory, and control of value. The data and legal powers built in wartime give states leverage over both. That leverage is rarely surrendered willingly. Hidden fact 13. The language around inflation is designed to sound harmless. Listen carefully to how war-related inflation is discussed. Words like overheating, price pressures, transitory effects, and necessary adjustments appear. The language is technical and soft. It suggests normal cycles, not structural damage. The reality is harsher. War inflation is the process of permanently changing who owns what, who stays solvent, and who slides into quiet ruin. It is a transfer of real resources from the general population to the war effort and to those positioned closest to the money spigot. By wrapping this process in mild, abstract terms, policymakers dull public reaction. Citizens hear that inflation is running slightly above target, not that your savings are being diluted to fund artillery. As long as the language stays bloodless, the underlying violence of the process remains hidden. Hidden fact 14. Every generation wants to believe its war is different. The Romans believed their frontier campaigns were unique. The Spanish believed their religious wars were a special case. The British believed their global conflicts were fights for civilization itself. Modern nations believe their interventions are one-time emergencies that justify bending all the rules. Each insists that inflation this time will be temporary, controlled and reversed when the crisis passes. Each builds speeches and campaigns around that promise. Each runs into the same stubborn constraints: math, scarcity, and human nature. War always demands more than leaders expect. Once the machinery of inflation is turned on to fill the gap, turning it off completely is harder than anyone admits. Promises made at the beginning of the conflict rarely match the reality a decade later. Hidden fact 15. The only protection is seeing the pattern before everyone else. You cannot personally stop wars. You cannot veto central bank decisions. You cannot prevent governments from choosing inflation over overt default. What you can do is refuse to be surprised. War and inflation move together with the consistency of a law. When conflict escalates, when commitments multiply, when leaders talk about doing whatever it takes without explaining how they will pay for it, the sequence has already begun. The details will differ. The pattern will not. Those who survive these cycles best are not the ones who trust the system most deeply. They are the ones who quietly assume that money will be sacrificed to war and act accordingly, diversifying what they hold, avoiding dependence on fixed nominal promises, and never confusing patriotic speeches with sound balance sheets. The comforting story says wars end, prices normalize, and life goes back to what it was. History says something else. War leaves deep marks on money, and money leaves deep marks on every life that depends on it. Once you understand that, you stop waiting for things to return to normal and start preparing for the world that war and inflation always leave behind.